March. I'm the director of the center. It's our custom to always thank everyone who's associated with this event, so I want to thank the staff of the Center for the Study of Ethics, our faculty advisory board, all of the partners and collaborators across campus that make this week possible. So our theme is ethics, education, and democracy, and some of you may have looked at the schedule, but if you haven't had a chance, you can either Google UVU Ethics, and the schedule's right on our landing page, or you can scan one of the QR codes on the side of the room and take a look at what we've got going. We've got 14 sessions in total and a number of different issues and formats, lectures, panel discussions, film screenings, and all of it is free and open to the public. So we'd love to have you join us for any portion you would like. So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our first session on the ethics of online testing. Dr. Ann Arndt will be the moderator, and I'll turn the time over to her. So please join me in welcoming Ann.
So I'm going to start out actually just trying to address what we...
You may need a mic.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to actually walk around though. Okay. So I'm going to start out by addressing what some of us might consider to be cheating and what some of us might not consider to be cheating. So I have a handout that I'm going to hand around here, and it's a list of well, not every, but many of the websites that may be deemed as cheating. With that what? Okay, yes, I just got to get these handed out quick. Okay, I'll just, yeah, if you would. Perfect. Okay, so when we see this list, I want to start out by chatting about how we might perceive things differently. Before I do that, though, I am curious in this room, how many, by raise of hands, are students in this room? Oh, yeah. Okay, down with the hands. How many are faculty or staff? Okay, all right, you students are going to outnumber this conversation, which is perfect. Because I want to ask you a couple questions about whether you consider some of these tools to be cheating. And then we're going to talk about what that might mean ethically, as well as the way in which we structure classes. So consider, for example, if you want to use a learning tool that helps you get answers. So if you have ever used Quizlet for anything, raise your hands. Do you guys see Quizlet as cheating? Anybody? Just shout out. Is Quizlet cheating? No, yeah, I got both. Okay, how many people are like, okay, Quizlet. So what is Quizlet? First of all, for people who don't know what it is, you basically look up quiz questions and it gives you the answer, right? And some of the answers are upvoted, so you know it's basically fairly likely that the answers are correct. I can tell you right now, you can go to Quizlet and look up Biology 1010 and find quiz questions there, along with their answers, right? So I am curious with that one, is it cheating because I'm looking up answers? So even if you raise your hand and said, I've done it, who thinks like, yeah, that's kind of cheating to look up an answer on Quizlet? You're doing it on a quiz. Yeah, so let's say you have two monitors. You have a quiz up on one monitor for Biology 1010, and on the other monitor you have your web browser with Quizlet open. Is that cheating? Yeah. Is anybody kind of on the opposing side of that to say, no, it's not really cheating? I am curious because actually the biology faculty are aware that 1010 questions are up there, and they have, at least in historical context, left it be, because they just want you to learn biology. And if you learn biology by looking up things, then power to you. I'm not sure that they still have that stance, but it is an interesting stance to have, right? So there's a series of websites you can use to get answers, and which some of them refer to themselves as learning tools, right? So is it or is it not a learning tool? So what if we're going to pop down to crowdsourcing answers, and there's a few of those where it's basically individuals helping individuals. So it's like asking your friend about a question, right? And so is that cheating or not if you're just asking other people? How about if you use something like Photomath? Who's heard of Photomath before? Huh? Anybody, what does Photomath do? It solves, you just take a picture of your math problem and it solves it for you, right? It's a pretty cool tool. Is that cheating? No, you're using it at homework. Okay, all right. So one thing with that is that actually you have to sort of still try to figure out how they came to the answer, right? In math, getting the correct answer is only half of the game. Understanding how that answer came to be, that's what math is actually about, right? And so to some degree, photomath kind of helps you, and to some degree, it sort of doesn't. And so I guess it's a question of how you're actually using it. How about a resource like Chegg? So Chegg is considered to be a tutorial with answers. So Chegg basically says, I'm in an economics class, I'm trying to figure something out, I can't figure it out, I watch a video, it explains it to me, I try again, I still can't figure it out, I read some information, I try again, right? So Chegg sort of helps you try to get to the answers. Who in this room has used Chegg? Nobody? Really? Just one, two? Okay, Chegg is a pretty cool tool. I know I use it for my own 21-year-old to help them get through some of these classes. And it is a subscription-based, though, right? So we're paying $15 a month, basically, in my opinion, to get an economics tutor for my child. So do I consider it cheating? No, because it's helping him understand the topic at hand. And they don't actually use it when they're actually taking their exams. So we also have writing services. Oh, those are good. Okay, so writing services, I think it's clear if I go and buy a paper, that's cheating, right? It's not your work, okay, even if you paid for it. But what if I'm using a website and it is helping me with copy editing? Maybe, maybe not. What if it's helping me structure my paper? What if it's giving me the basic outline of what I might be needing to do in my paper, right? To understand the structure of paper. At what point are those things cheating, right? So we also have areas where they will actually do your homework for you. Now that one, I think if we have the spectrum of what is cheating, you pay to somebody to do your homework, I think it's pretty clear that's probably cheating. But I listed them anyway, so you guys know that these exist, okay? And so as we look at it, I think we have to wonder, what does it mean to cheat? When is it okay to be looking up answers? I know in my classes, so if anybody's taken Tech 1010, that's my fault, that's my class, or was. Tech 1010, we basically said the quizzes are just open book, unlimited time. Solves the problem, right? So you just go do whatever you need to do to find the answers. We don't care, just find the answers. And it makes us question things like, how important is that rote memorization, right, as instructors? How important is it to you as students? When we don't know something, what we tend to do is Google it, right? So really in the world, a question is, how fast can you find the answer? And if that's the way we function, what is cheating, right? What does it mean in the academic world? And so with that, I'm gonna actually turn over to Seth, and Seth's gonna talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we assess you in classrooms, in particular and online. And then we're gonna talk about where that might be a problem or not.
Yeah, I can stand. So I won't spend too much time belaboring this point because how many of you have taken an online course before? How many of you have taken? Most of you have taken online, so you've been exposed to it one way or another. So you know a lot of the common methods of doing it, or doing assessment within courses, are things like online exams, papers. We often have projects with deliverables, so the dreaded group work, right, the group project, and building things, doing flyers, posting videos. How many of you posted videos for a class? A few of you have done that. And then less commonly, there's some real world stuff, so things like doing service learning out in the community, doing ride-alongs, so emergency services. And then there are things like simulations, like VR, everything from VR and digital media to some basic kind of point-and-click simulations. What I want you to understand about how assessments are chosen is that there's a lot of powerful forces at play in terms of why certain things are done. So part of it is sort of the history of the field. So this is how we assess. So faculty get assessed a certain way as they're going through school. So then when it becomes time for them to assess, it's only natural that you assess students the way you were assessed, because after all, that's what got you where you are today. There's also student expectations shaping it as well. So I mentioned the dreaded group work. How many of you like group work in your online? Okay, Sam, he doesn't count. Pretty much no one. But we require it often, and we ask for it often. So that's part of it. I was talking with a professor who teaches pre-med students. Any pre-med students? Okay, we got a few pre-meds. And she described trying some creative assessment strategies only to get pushback by their students. Why? Because the pre-med students are very good at traditional assessments. I hope you are, because if you're going to make it into med school, you got to be. And that's what, so they want the exams, they want the traditional assessments because they're the apex predators of the traditional assessments. That's how they got where they are. Other forces at play are things like third-party publishers. McGraw-Hill will come to campus and will offer you a test bank. And in some ways, that's not the worst outcome. If you've ever experienced a poorly written multiple choice exam, you might be wishing your professors had relied on a publisher test bank. It's also convenient. Faculty are rational players. They're teaching a lot of classes, a lot of students, and if a vendor will come and offer you a test bank, it's an easy way to kind of to get some things done so they can move on to other things, because very few faculty enjoy writing exam questions. There's also an argument to be made that the LMS itself is also partly responsible, because Canvas, out of the box, offers you easy ways to create written assessments, to give quizzes, to give exams. It's often more on the edge of what a learning management system like Canvas offers to do more creative assessments. So when we talk about why do faculty choose the assessments that they do to give to you as students, it's often these kind of bigger things at play. I'm curious if the audience has any comments about that. Or questions. I should have introduced myself. Probably should have done that. I'm Seth Gorell. I'm Director of Instructional Design. That means I manage the people who work with faculty to put courses online. We don't touch every single online course, but we do many of them. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
And I guess I should have introduced myself as well, actually. So I'm the Associate Dean for Student Affairs in the College of Engineering and Technology. Historically, I've been a faculty member in the Department of Technology Management, and I have been at UVU for approximately 20 years. So a long time in this type of environment. All right, we're going to go on to talking about not just these cheating websites, which, by the way, if you came late, there is a handout somewhere towards the back of the room, and it has all the websites you could possibly want to find assistance resources. All right. But before we I also want to talk a little bit then about some of the ways, let me get my notes, make sure I do this in the right order. The cheating practices that happen online. So I want to specifically focus on proctored online exams, okay? So many of you probably had them in COVID, and you had to turn on your camera, and you had to sit there and take your exam so we knew that you weren't cheating, right? That gets into that world of sort of the traditional quizzes that Seth was talking about. That is what we're used to. That is how we basically tested understanding for like ever, except for now we do it online. And instead of your teacher, you have some proctor standing there basically watching over you from a distance. So there is things you can do to cheat in an online proctored exam as well. Anybody want to volunteer some ideas? If I'm in an online proctored exam and I want to cheat, help your fellow students. How would you cheat in an online proctored exam?
Just speaking for a friend, right?
I mean, you would never just to have an ethical conversation about how you shouldn't do it. Anybody? What would you do? Yes, if you have your camera facing at you because we want to watch where your eyes are going, absolutely, right? And with that, like, we can tell if you're looking further away, right? But you're looking at your monitor, and you zoom in around your monitor, how are we going to know? Unless we go and say you have to have multiple cameras, which some people do, right? And some people will say you have to room scan, right? Now, why would they say room scan? Why would any faculty ever say that? Yeah, So I can have my tools elsewhere, right? So especially if I have eyesight better than my age, right? I can have notes on my wall. I can actually have somebody standing in the back corner kind of telling me number or answers, right? I could have a second monitor where they could see what my questions are. So I'm looking at my monitor, somebody else is looking at my other one, feeding me answers, right? There's a lot of ways I can do this, right? You can go buy little resources. You can go buy yourself a watch that's a fake watch, right? And it's actually gonna give you answers. You probably have watches that you can actually access the internet, right? So then do we have to monitor if you're like looking at your watch? So how about this? What if I decide I need to go to the bathroom, okay? As a faculty member, even if I'm proctoring, especially if, like, am I gonna stop somebody from going to the bathroom? And if that's the case, how do I monitor that? I can't necessarily monitor that, right? Another thing I could do is my multi-screen thing, or even on the same screen, I can have helper software or websites up, and I can click back and forth between the two, right? And so I just gave you, for example, a bunch of websites where you can get answers. What's stopping me from having my online proctored exam on one tab and having the second tab over be the answer sheet, right? Quizlet, and I'm just popping back and forth. I'm staring at my computer, I'm doing my thing, I'm basically not pausing at all, right? I'm just boop, boop, looking, boop, boop, answering, okay? So one of the things that we would do to deter that is we do the browser lockdown, right? So we're like, no leaving the screen on that you have up right now. And if you do, you're basically frozen out, okay? So we have solutions to some of these things, which actually we're gonna talk about in a second. But basically there's a lot of ways in which we can cheat. So how about let's leave proctored exams for a second, or actually you might even have to do this in a proctored exam. What about when you have to write essays? So short essays, mini essays, that type of thing. That opens a whole new avenue for ways to cheat online, right? Because we can go and rip off sources and pretend they're our own. We can fabricate information that isn't really real, right? And pretend that we actually had real information. So in all of these, there's some basic ways in which we would categorize cheating. And this is cheating online and anywhere else. We would basically say it's collusion if you're cheating with other people. So it's collusion if I'm using a group site and getting answers from that other students posted. It's collusion if I have my roommate signing me answers from the other side. It's collusion if student 1 takes the test and photo grabs and sends the photos to other classmates so that they know what the quiz questions are, okay? And so all of those types of things are collusion. We also have deception. So deception in an online proctored exam, what might that be? Most likely, somebody's taken the test for you, right? I don't know. I taught 1010 for years, right? I don't know what my students look like. They're all online, right? And even if I say, turn on your camera so I can see that you're participating, I don't know for sure that that's what Maple looks like. I've never met Maple, right? And so I could actually have somebody taking my class in my stead. Now, is that ethical? No. Is it possible? Sure. Has it likely happened? Of course. And then we have to figure out how we're gonna bust that type of thing. Then we have the standard plagiarism, which everybody did. Basically, you should know plagiarism. If you don't, you should, right? Basically, if you're ripping something off from another source, put quote marks around it, because then it's a direct quote, and then it's not ripping stuff off anymore, okay? But you can't do that for an entire paper. But basically, plagiarism is taking somebody's work and claiming it as your own. That actually goes not just for papers. If you're one of those people who downloads images and sticks it in, if we go and say something like, take a picture of a cumulus cloud, and you're like, I don't know what a cumulus cloud is, and I don't have time, and it's 10 o'clock at night. So I'm gonna go find a cumulus cloud and post it, look and see if the pictures have been taken from Google, and then you're gonna get a 0, if not an F on the assignment, or F for the class. Then we have technological manipulation. And this is basically using technology to manipulate your opportunities available to you. So having the multiple screens, having a mobile device sitting next to you that's feeding you answers, right? Anything in which you're using technology to assist you in trying to cheat. And then we have misrepresentation. And so that misrepresentation might be things like having information that isn't actually accurate, pretending you did research you actually didn't do, taking information out of context, but it can also be using materials that were supplied by another individual, okay, which dances a little bit more closely to plagiarism. So then what are some things that we do as faculty to help deter this from happening? Although I know nobody in this room would ever do this, right? Any of these things. So I'm married to a faculty member who's in earth science. Mike Buns is my husband. If anybody's ever had Mike Buns, or if you ever plan to take an earth science class from him, let me tell you right now, his number one strategy on every lab and every quiz is to change the numbers. So the assignment looks exactly the same, but the numbers are different. And every single week, I swear, since I've been married, every week he comes and tells me how many students turned in lab results with answers from a previous semester, right? And so we don't mind you going and looking at previous lab results to see what their answer was and how but then what you need to do is figure out how they got to that answer and then actually look at your lab and notice the numbers are different and then try to answer it, right? And so he is quite successful, actually, at catching people cheating that way. And it's actually a bit depressing because he's been doing it this way forever. And the students talk to each other. You'd think you'd kind of at least have this word out, right? Like, go ahead and rip off an old lab, but make sure you understand what it is, and then go try to do the new lab, okay? It's something we faculty do. Another thing we'll do, which is a common practice for me, in 1010, Tech 1010, there's like 20 sections of it, and we had people cheating. And not just cheating on papers. They're turning in, we say make a solar cooker, right? And they'll turn in a solar cooker that we've seen 2 semesters ago, or a picture of a solar cooker you could get on Google, right? So then we're like, fine, you have to take a picture of the thermometer when it starts and when it ends. So then what? People take pictures from Google solar cookers, and then they take 2 pictures of a thermometer and post it. All right, fine. So then what we said is, you know what? You have to be in the photo, or your hand has to be in the photo, right? And so we'll actually mix things up so that now in our Tech 1010 assignments, we specifically say something like, you have to be in the photo, right? Or your hand, or whatever we choose for that particular time period, right? Another thing we'll do is we'll change the assignment. So we'll change the assessment to something you can't find the answer for. So a common thing to do is to use really current news, right? So we'll say something like, based on what happened last week in this news article, what do you think or how would you react? Okay, so I do that way more in my master's level classes, and actually for some reason they're less likely to cheat in that arena, but it keeps my content fresh and it makes it so people can't cheat, right? We also do things like, based on your personal experience, how did this go, right? And maybe you can rip off a personal experience from somebody else, but it's just as fast to just write your own, right? Rather than going to try to find one that's plausible from somebody else. But I do have one more question, and I think Seth alluded to this too, which is, does it matter what field you're in, right? So is cheating different in humanities than it is in College of Science? Or even inside of College of Science, is cheating different in a physics class than it is in an astronomy class? And if so, why might that be, right? And I think as faculty members, when we look and say, what is cheating, it's very individualized, right? So for me, that list I gave you of the cheating websites, when I'm teaching a class, I basically say, power to ya. Use the whole thing minus the ripping off papers part, okay? I want people to help you write papers. I want you to be asking people questions. I want you to be able to look stuff up, right? But I teach in technology management, right? That's our game. That's what we tell people to do. Like Seth alluded to, I would not necessarily want somebody who's going into pre-med to not be able to memorize stuff, right? Or to have to look up answers. That's not a very comfortable place to be. But again, it varies based on the industry that we're in. It varies based on the topic that we're talking about. And to some degree, it varies based on the class, right? He had mentioned group work. Cheating can just as likely happen in group work types of environments, right? And so then that becomes even more complicated, because then you say, do I fail the whole class or the whole group for the actions of one person, right? And those become some really tough questions for us to answer. But circling back, so cheating practices in online virtual proctored exams. I might pretend I had camera issues. I might actually do things like purposely dart my eyes all around so the person, because it's not my teacher usually watching it, right? So that's just my common action. So it's less alerting when I actually do it. So I'm consciously being a fidget monkey, right? So that when I fidget to find my answers, it's just partially normal. So as a faculty member, what we can do is we can actually go, in some cases at least, and we can look at the videos ourselves, right? So it flags you, and it says this person might be cheating. I then go in and look at the video, and I'm like, oh, no, that's Bob. That's just Bob, right? It's okay. Bob does that all the time. And then I can choose to consider it cheating or not. Anti-plagiarism checkers, when we turn on papers, some of your faculty will let you see your plagiarism check before you turn in your assignment. Some of us won't, right? But it's very simple. You turn in a paper, it's a button we click. Boop, did they plagiarize? And then it pulls up your paper, and it says everywhere that stuff was copied, exactly where it was copied from, and the percentage of which this is not original work. We have differing opinions on as faculty about how much has to be unique before we consider it to be cheating, right? Is it 10 words in a row? Is it a third of the paper, right? Is it the key points? But no matter what, we get the plagiarism check, and we get to decide as faculty on some of the things that we would personally consider to be cheating. With that, I am going to go over, and Seth, if you want to do, I might have taken half of your thunder, but do you want to say a little bit from your perspective in Office of Teaching and Learning on the ethical considerations for students with cheating?
So there's a couple of things. I'm going to start with online proctoring, specifically sort of the Proctorio group, sort of group of tools. But I do want to add something on Unicheck, the plagiarism detector. This is, as Anne mentioned, there's often divided opinions among faculty. So our English department's very opposed in general to using plagiarism checkers. One of the common criticisms of tools like Unicheck, which is what UVU uses, is that your paper becomes part of the database. So you essentially help a company out with their bottom line every time you submit a paper through Unicheck, because it just expands the database even further. Going to online proctoring specifically for exams, there are 7 failures of, or at least argued failures of online proctoring. So one is that it's invasive, that it requires scanning your room. Recently, a judge in Ohio agreed with that and found that requiring a room scan violated the student's civil rights. And so Cleveland State University has to go back to the drawing board and figure out what can be done. It can be considered discriminatory for a number of reasons if you think about your room and what it says about your identity. Asking students to hold up their ID card may be discriminatory against transgendered students who are in the process of transitioning. We've also had frequent criticism of these tools as being discriminatory towards persons of color. There are many anecdotes of students across the country and even here at UVU that students with darker skin are failing checks more frequently than white students. We've also had students with disabilities be more frequently flagged. So students trying to use the Zoom feature, the accessibility feature, so they have vision, a disability related to vision, they use the zoom in feature, the accessibility feature within their computer, and then that gets flagged as suspicious behavior. Third, algorithms that determine acceptable behavior are opaque and proprietary. So we as staff and faculty, it is a certain amount of a black box. So when we look at something like Unicheck and how it gets to determine your paper is 16% non-original content. There are, with that tool, there is a little bit where we can dig in and we can kind of see where the text is being compared. With something like Proctorio, what constitutes suspicious eye movement? Half a second, a quarter of a second, a 16th of a second? We don't know because it is all proprietary. And there have been folks like myself who have posted, tweeted screenshots of code or of the interface itself and offering critique. Those people have been sued by Proctorio as one of those leading out on that. So Ian Linkletter, who is now a librarian, was kind of in my role, sort of, is now $100,000 in legal fees trying to fight Proctorio because he posted screenshots and offered a critique of the tool. And we, like I said, we don't know to the extent to which these algorithms are on the good side or the bad side. A company like Proctorio, and I keep going to Proctorio since that's our tool. How many of you have taken a Proctorio exam? So we've gotten a few of you. That's good, because I want to ask your thoughts later. Proctorio had their code audited by a third party, that a consulting firm that specializes in ethical use of AI. And they believe that it's come out clean, but it's always been hard, like I said, because we have reports across the nation indicating that persons of color come out disproportionately checked when compared to white students. Another is that sensitive data resides with a third-party company. So you holding up your ID, now Proctorio has video of you with your ID. In one instance, a student, one of the articles I read, a student was ended up taking a phone call in the middle of her test. Found out, she put it on speakerphone because she was worried the professor would assume she was cheating by taking the call in the middle of the test. And it was someone telling her a family member had died. So now Proctorio has video of her finding out her, it was a close relative had died. So there's that sense of the sense that the sensitive data resides with that company. Requirements to install software, often on personal computers, because I assume many of you who took your test or exam on Proctorio were using a personal computer. You essentially had to download software that you didn't want, didn't ask for, and don't particularly need, and you don't know how it functions and what's getting reported back to Proctorio. It's just you were told you have to download this and use this. The next criticism is that it's ineffective. So a university in the Netherlands just published a research paper arguing that proctoring does not work. And we talked, Anna alluded a little bit to that, that it amounts to security theater, that that just doesn't do anything because there's ways to work around it, whether it's the sticky notes. I heard someone tell me last week they have someone sitting underneath the table tapping out the answers on their leg, which is, at that point, I don't know why you just don't study at that point, but like, that's what they do. So there's questions about the effectiveness, and I saw a few people nodding their heads saying it isn't effective. And then seventh, it creates a hostile relationship between faculty and students. No faculty member, except maybe, well, I'm just going to say this, no faculty member wants to police their students in this way. Handling academic integrity issues, I can tell you as someone who teaches part-time here, is my least favorite thing to do. And I think for the vast majority of faculty, it is something they would gladly just jettison from their job and never have to deal with. So those are the arguments against proctoring. It's quite a list. So let's talk about some of the things that are considerations in favor of proctoring. So one is the sense that it does catch some cheating. And we've had students test this early on when we had Proctorio, where they would pull out the book and we would catch them on, because they just didn't think anyone would really actually catch them. So some of it is that it works. I think some of it is a perception that it creates a chilling effect, that you will be scared you will be less inclined, I should say, to cheat if you know you have to take a Proctorio exam. We had a guest speaker a couple of years ago, pre-COVID. His name's David Rettinger. He's from University of Virginia. Oh, I'll get the exact title. But anyway, he's part of an ethics center. And he talked about 3 groups of students. The students who will cheat no matter what. Some of you know those people. And the people who will never cheat no matter what. And then there's the giant middle of students who will mostly not cheat. And the perception is that Proctorio will enable the students who are just not inclined to cheat, that it will remove that temptation from them, that they won't have to deal with that. Another factor facing it is that it shows our accrediting bodies, because they do ask, how do you verify your identity of your students within their courses? It shows our accreditors that we're serious about it. And it arguably shows us collectively that we're serious about it. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on Proctorio, full stop. And based on current, I don't know if it's true of the current trajectory, maybe Sam can tell me, but at one point we were on track to have Proctorio costs eclipse the cost of Canvas itself. And so it's super expensive to do this. And it's a source of concern for our administration, because those hundreds of thousands of dollars could be going to any number of things, like better equipment, scholarships, faculty pay, you name it. And so there is that consideration. So those are some of the things. The other is, and Anne alluded to this a little bit, and I've seen nursing faculty advance this argument. Why not require proctoring? Because if you go to the hospital and you have a nurse by your bed, you want them to have all that rote memorization and knowledge there. And so if it means inconveniencing students, then it is well worth it in terms of saving people's lives, because they know what they're talking about, and because when you're at someone's bedside, you don't have time to go to Quizlet to get the right answer. One of the other arguments is that because it gives assurance to faculty that some measures of academic integrity are being taken place, then they're more willing to put a course online. We have courses that could go online that are not online because faculty are not convinced that the exams will have integrity, or they're worried about having integrity. So we have opportunities where students could be taking online classes and they don't have the opportunity. And for this group who is here on a Tuesday at 10 a.m., that may not be compelling, but if you're a mom who can take their exam at 11 o'clock at night with the trade-off of just being asked to do a room scan, there are students out there, particularly working adults, parents, who will gladly take that trade-off any day to just, fine, scan my room, you can see dirty diapers or whatever, and then let me take my test so I can get my degree so I can move on. Those are some of the ethical considerations. So I want to open the floor, because we really... Okay. Okay.
And then we'll open.
All right, go ahead.
To actually start the opening of the conversation, I want to bring up just a few thoughts. So first, again, with my 21-year-old, I made that they were taking a proctored exam, and being the mom, I just go right down there, and the door's closed, which it usually isn't, right? But I'm a mom, so I'm like, open it, and turns out they were in the middle of a proctored exam, right? And so I have basically made a challenge for my own 21-year-old in the proctoring environment. There was one other thing that we do as faculty that I failed to mention, and I think it's an important one, and that is that he had mentioned it, but I want to explain what it is, which is quiz banks. And so we will have quiz banks where we will have 200 questions, right? And it will pull 15 of them. And that assures that nobody is getting quite the same questions. However, there is conundrums with that, right? Because inherently in writing questions, some questions are going to be easier than others, or perceived as easier than others. And so if I'm randomly pulling questions, there is a possibility that one person is going to get an exam that is more challenging than another person is, right? And how do I handle that as a faculty member? We also can start doing things. We haven't gone too far down this road, except for like when I turned on my computer, it's biometric, right? It has to see me. So I had to take my glasses off to be like, really, it's me, Mr. Computer, right? So we could start doing things like that, right? Where it's like you have to do a fingerprint, you have to do an eye scan, right? Facial recognition. And that comes with a slew of additional ethical issues if we went down that road, right? But before we open it into conversation, I want to throw some things out just to kind of get the conversation going. So one, does it matter if students are looking up resources from wherever you're looking them up? If it's a book, if it's a website, if it's another person, right? When does that actually matter? Does it matter if it's a human versus a robot? Or somehow the rule's different if I ask a person compared to asking a machine, okay? And if so, why? Right? Why is it different to go down to the tutoring lab and have somebody tell me how to do it when I could look at a tutoring thing online and find out basically the same thing? What if I see that as a tutor, right? What is a tutor in today's day and age? How about collaboration, right? So when is it collaborating like you would do in a study group of the days of old, right? So my era, we would all end up in the student center in one room at 2 o'clock in the morning, frantically studying for psychology class, right? Giving questions back and forth to each other. How is that different than trying to do that online right now with your friends and family or whatever you're doing? And at what point does it become an abuse of the technological tools? So before we open it into conversation, I do actually want to note that the reason we had the panel we did, and my apologies that Polly was not able to be here, she's actually in another meeting across campus. We wrote a paper, the three of us, on addressing cheating in virtual proctored exams. And that paper is listed at the back side here. It is a worthy read, I think. It's a bit more on the perspective of faculty, right? Because it's a framework of mitigation strategies. So it actually is an entire paper saying, hey, faculty, contemplate what it means to cheat, and here's some things you might want to do to mitigate. As students, it's very helpful for you to know what we are doing as faculty, right? Because then you know how to navigate that. So for example, with Canvas, if you're in a Canvas course, right? I think we still can, I'm pretty sure, we could before. I can look up how long a student's been on Canvas, right? So as a faculty member, if you go take my exam and it takes you 14 minutes, I'm like, wait a minute, that's really weird because everybody else took like 2 hours, right? I can also look up, did Mary log into class in the last 2 weeks, yes or no? So if Mary comes to me and says, blah, 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 I didn't get this done because I had whatever, or the computer froze, I can see if she even logged in, right? And so just knowing, I think, that your faculty can look up some of this stuff, whether we do it or not is another thing, right? I think that's important to consider. But a question to that is, does it matter if you logged in every week or every other day? Does it matter if it took him 15 minutes to do the assignment and it took him 45? I don't know. It depends what the assignment is. So with that little preamble, I want to ask one last question, and we're going to open it up. Because right here in the front row, we have all the ruling people of Office of Teaching and Learning. So I'm curious, Karen, we're going to start with you because she has been support. She's been here for 20 plus years. What would you say is a message you would want to leave students with? We're going to do you three, and then we'll open it up. Come on, you can do it. Nothing like impromptu.
Yeah, okay. Well, gosh, I don't know. Just I would say well, I mean, like she said, I run support. If you have any problems, don't leave anything till the last minute. If you've got a time test, don't start taking it at 11:50 because it's going to be due in 5 minutes. Just give yourself plenty of time to do the technology. And if you have any problems, seek help before you start that exam. That's my perspective.
Do exams really auto shut off?
Yeah, they do. They really do. They really stop, and you're stuck in the middle of something. So
It's a computer that does that, not a person.
right. It is. The computer will stop. It will kick you out of the exam at that point. Just be as honest as you can, and if you run into problems, just talk to your faculty. Most times they will work with you if you're just completely straightforward with them about what happened. Things like that.
Tip number 2, impromptu.
Yeah. Okay, so, all right, surprise. Um, and I totally see where you're coming from. Sometimes it is easier to kind of use Quizlet in order to find the answer because it's there. There is nothing wrong with that as long as you use it the right way. So using Quizlet, yeah, to study for an exam, to do the flashcards is really okay. And sometimes if you have doubt, just ask your professor. They should be able to answer that question. And if it's for a paper, use the resources. I go to the writing center. I keep telling my students, why aren't you going to the writing center? They are there to help you. So instead of like you have a question for like APA citations, I know that's a nightmare. I hate it just as much as you do. So just go to the writing center and ask for support with that. Like the university has so many resources to kind of help you. So I hope that helps a little bit.
All right. Well, the only thing that I would add to this conversation is just realize that, especially with assessment, as Seth was talking, is this idea and this concept of what are the skills I'm trying to learn. I'm going through school for a certain skill base. And I do understand that sometimes you may be looking at a multiple choice test and saying, how is this skill going to help me? But sometimes, like, the rote memorization is important. Sometimes, talking to your instructor and saying, what is there another opportunity for me? A good example of that is language, is because when you learn, I could just throw my paper in English and grab it all out completely in Spanish. And so I can give that to my teacher, and then I don't have to write this paper in Spanish. Yet now I don't have the skill set for that. And so that's kind of the purpose of most of what they're trying to do with this assessment, is help me build the skills that will allow me to do what I need to do in my work. And so I do understand when you're in a general education course that it might be like, well, I'm never going to translate into Spanish, but that might be something I have to work through, and it might be some skill set that, yes, with technology it's amazing that I can actually use Google Translate and be able to get something done much quicker. But that's some of the things, is the well-rounded aspects of being able to kind of learn a new language. That might be great. It might be in math. I do understand. I don't know the last time you factored polynomial expressions, but it might be something that, why is that assessment important? And so what's the skill set that they're really trying to get me to learn? And then it helps you understand the assessment a lot better.
Excellent, because you are the ones paying for your education, right? You're paying a lot of money, for that matter, for your education, and so take advantage of it. But with that, we are going to open up the questions or commentary on anything you have. You have a number of people who are pretty deep into this particular area. Oh, thank you.
I'm just curious, given the known ineffectiveness of online education and the given issues that we're having, do you believe that it's going to continue for any other reason except the convenience factor?
So I would dispute the ineffectiveness of online education. When we talk about proctoring, we can talk about the value or the limitations. One of the interesting things we're seeing on the proctoring front, because I'll just say on the effectiveness of online education, we could probably have like a separate, you and I could go to lunch and have a 2-hour on that. On the proctoring question specifically, will this continue? One of the interesting things we're seeing is that we've got these judgments against institutions, and then we have accreditors increasingly expecting it. So if an institution of our size did not have something like a proctorio agreement, I think they would be asking a lot of questions why we don't. And so we're kind of caught between these two things. Yeah. And when several of the articles I've read recently have indicated that a lot of these proctoring companies do think they will weather it. In fact, I saw one of the quotes from Proctorio saying, look, as we get to more of, we go back to the sort of whatever we call the new normal, that students who are uncomfortable with online proctoring will simply choose to do it on campus. Like they'll just kind of self-select out. And then that will leave the people who are okay with the trade-offs to continue doing it. So the predictions, at least if you read kind of what's out there right now, is that online proctoring will continue to be there. Just touching on the general about online education, I think it is a permanent part of the landscape of education, of higher ed. The degree to which it is, I think, is a hotly debated topic, and in terms of the blending and where we're going to go. And again, that goes to the two-hour discussion. Starbucks on me if you're interested. But so that's probably the shortest answer I can give you.
I'm gonna give a perspective on that too, and then we'll take the next question. So I myself, my doctorate, I did a distance doctorate. It's been 8-9 years ago, so it was back in the beginning. But I was a single parent working full-time, adjuncting on the side to pay for my education. I did not have alternatives. I didn't feel, at least at that time, I didn't have family in the area. So it was the best thing I could come up with. And it gave me a future I wouldn't have been able to have. Maybe there was things that would be more ideal, but for my circumstances, that was absolutely a door opener for me. And then I do want to comment actually on this campus, and anybody on this campus can correct me if I'm wrong, but some of you might have been around long enough to know about the testing center when you would have to go to the testing center on campus and stand in a line, right, and sit and use their computers over there. Online proctoring, Proctorio, has taken place of that, right? And so one question becomes, if we don't use Proctorio and we have to have proof that these students are taking the exams, do we circle back to going back to something like the testing center? And that space has been absorbed. The people have been somewhat absorbed, right? So, but it is a conversation to be had. And in this institution, it's my understanding that we have put our cards more towards online and less towards human proctored exams in a centralized testing center.
It's worth noting Karen, who spoke earlier, part of her job, a major part of her job years ago, was to line up students who were living out of state or outside of UVU who couldn't use the testing center, trying to line them up with a proctor, to do a live proctor to do it. And it was quite an ordeal. And expensive. So you're trying to get, because expense, we were looking at maybe $50 an exam. Yeah, $50 a test. So if you take your standard 3 tests and a final, you could be at $200 just for live proctoring expenses. And that's assuming you could find it. So I thought about a student you will remember who was living in Virginia, could not find a live proctor to save her life, tried the local college, could not get in because they were prioritizing their other students. And, and then it's like, what do we do? How do we do this equitably? How do we do this fairly?
Other questions
Or comments? Go.
or comments?
So when it comes to the Cleveland case, what does that mean for like the rest of schools?
Yeah, so right now it doesn't mean much because it was on, I think, a district level. It was as a very local level, but we're watching it. So jurisdictionally, it doesn't impact UVU at all, but it did cause some people to a great deal of surprise because it was one of these. It's a prominent case. It's like, is this the bellwether? Are we going to see more of these lawsuits come out? There are some things that were interesting about the Cleveland decision specifically. So one of the things that was interesting is the judgment did not preclude the possibility of proctoring by other means. So it was very narrowly on the room scan specifically. And so the judge allowed for for perhaps algorithmically. So one of the things that's, one method of proctoring that's come up is keystroke patterns. So the way you type on a keyboard is distinct, or distinct enough that they could tie it to your identity. So that wasn't precluded as part of the Cleveland decision. The other thing that I find really fascinating about it was the judge cited some of these alternative methods of assessment that we talked about as viable ways. So they're saying, look, you don't have to use this technology. You have a whole wealth of other ways you could do assessment. That really stuck out to me because typically the courts have been very reluctant to say, to be perceived as interfering with how classrooms operate. And so they've really tried to be hands-off, but it was very interesting that this judge was willing to say, look, you can figure out other ways of testing that don't require proctoring. I'm going to be very interested to see how that gets handled. There wasn't an indication that Cleveland was going to appeal. I think they were trying to find a more productive means of like addressing the student concerns. But again, we're caught in a rock and a hard place. So is Miami University, which confusingly I think is in Ohio. They are renewed. So there was it's like a 127-page document outlining faculty and student concerns with proctoring, and they are looking at re-upping their contract with Proctorio because the concerns about accreditation, the feeling like there's nothing, we don't have any other good options. And so we're seeing a lot of people just keep using it. So that's going to be an interesting to see how that plays out. Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
Other questions or comments or thoughts? She'll bring the mic to you. Yeah.
Do you see the potential of having the testing center come back for classes that are in person?
I'm looking to my fellows employees here. No. Short answer, no. There is, however, so one college, and other individuals can correct me if I'm wrong. By my understanding, the College of Science is the one that is most inclined to want in-person proctored exams. So College of Science is likely going to continue to pursue their own version of it, but a centralized testing center for proctoring I find to be less likely. If not entirely unlikely. The only other circumstance in which I could see us doing it is if you ever have to take an exam where you're going to a site like Sylvan Learning to take a professional exam of some sort. So it's not a class exam, it's like get certified in like building inspection, right? Those might continue to exist, but that's a very different type of proctored exam. So for classrooms, if you're not in College of Science, I would definitely not, I would not hold my breath. I would assume something like Proctorio.
Just to add to that, part of the concern is the cost. So when we had a testing center, it was never, and no one ever expected a testing center to be profitable, but it was never break even in terms of the cost to the institution. As Ann mentioned, when it's disproportionately used by one school or college, that shaped things. And so I think that's one of the, we'll see with the College of Science is how do they make the financial numbers work. I think a testing center looks like a deceptively easy thing to do. Like you have a room, you put students in the room, they take the thing. But with all the testing, the training, the equipment, the scheduling, just the lights, heat, everything, and just the fact that space is at a premium on our campus are all things that kind of weigh in against us. Another thing that factors in as part of that discussion is UVU has one of the longest semesters of any institution in the state. So there is an argument to be made that what faculty should be doing is using some of their class time to do the proctored tests rather than insisting that they go to a testing center outside of class. And that's a point of pride for a lot of our faculty that we have the longest semester. And some of you are like, I know it by the end of the semester that we have one of the longest semesters of any institution in the state. But it's a point of pride, right? Because we feel like we're giving you the biggest bang for your buck, the most instruction, the most information as part of your semester. So that's part of that dynamic of the discussion.
And to go off of that, there is definitely strong different faculty opinions on if I should waste my time doing testing or assessments in my class when they can do it outside of class. Or, as noted, I could be the proctor myself by doing it in class, right? And if I do that, then what is my time limits? One other issue with having the testing center is physically just getting them the tests. Actually, as a faculty member, like we are changing our tests. I mean, to be honest, in some cases we'll change them the night before, and I can't do that in a proctored type of, a traditional proctored type of environment. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
So, the cost of using Proctorio came up, and so I'm wondering if it could just be made into like a, I'm guessing you pay for access for like, you pay more for more access for more students. So what if it's just made kind of like a, you can choose to use Proctorio or not? And
Yeah. So the way Proctorio works is it's a flat amount per student per year. So whether you do 10 tests or one test, then it's just one flat cost. And then it is up to the faculty. So we can reduce our Proctorio costs simply by faculty not requiring it as part of tests. And then we're less likely to have students being counting as users towards those costs. And that's part of what we're hoping to do with the Office of Teaching and Learning, not just because we want to reduce costs, like it's not just a money thing, but it's also because we'd rather have classes that require you to do fun, creative, interesting things rather than taking a bunch of high pressure, high stakes exams. Apologies to the med students, pre-med students. That's how we'd rather do it. I want to ask a question of the audience because when I was talking about the ineffectiveness of Proctorio, I saw some head nods. So I want to ask the audience, do you think Proctorio is effective at all? Or to some degree, or kind of? We talked about those middle students the students who are mostly honest and want to stay honest. Does Proctorio have that chilling effect? Does it actually do anything?
Like, hey, I'm taking a test. Yeah, sorry. People coming in the room to interrupt it, but I've never had anything flagged that I know of. Does it inform you? I don't even
I
know.
don't think it does.
So I've never
Or
had any problems with it, but
Karen, does it? Does it? Okay, I'll let Karen. Yeah, go ahead.
Chances are it did flag you. The professor has the option the professor gets a report of all the flags and they can go and watch that part of the video where it flags. And so the professor either didn't view it or saw it and realized that you had no control over your roommates walking in on you, kind of a thing. So.
I want to follow up with her though before somebody else. And so that is, so you mentioned, or at least what I think I heard you say is that it made you actually even more anxious to take a test. Would that be accurate?
absolutely.
Okay.
Like I feel like I'm pretty honest. Like if I wouldn't try to cheat, but I would think that anything that I'm gonna do while taking the test, I'm like paranoid that I'm gonna get flagged about anything.
Okay, so it raises the tension.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say it increases the temptation to cheat, and just from an anecdotal perspective, everyone I know has taken advantage of it. And I surround myself with good people. Like, I have good friends. I have people who take their education seriously, like pre-med students, and they take advantage of it. It's real.
So to find a way around, you mean to be like, this is a challenge. I'm going to see if I can beat this. Or just like it's
It's
easy enough
easier to
cheat?
get around than normal, like, testing centers. It's way easier to
Okay.
get around. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, yeah, you could have the sticky notes, but you could also just put your phone behind the camera.
Right. Okay.
There's so many
it's
ways.
just so tempting. So it's like having an unlocked bicycle and somebody's going to steal it, right? Like, so it's just the temptation is there, so it makes it more conducive.
Yeah. And I tell people that I actually, like, don't get help from my friends for tests, and they look at me weird. So,
Like, why not?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other commentary for Seth's question?
Like the option to share my screen instead of the camera watching me. I agree with the comment that was said earlier of having someone watch me makes me feel really anxious, makes me feel like, for example, my psychology professor, she allowed us to have one sheet of notes, but it was a Proctorio test. And so I felt every time I looked at my sheet of notes that I was allowed to have, it would flag me for cheating. And so I feel like even if I have to give permission to share my screen and make sure I'm not using online resources like Quizlet during a test, I would feel more comfortable with that because knowing that someone's watching me through my camera like might make me perform not as well because I'm more stressed out or I'm focusing on behaving correctly instead of just taking the test.
One of the interesting things about Proctorio is I believe you can configure it that way. You could say no camera, but yes, share screen. But it's what do faculty consider? It's how restrictive or loose they make the settings. That goes to kind of what Karen was saying about you can have it flag, be very strict on it, how things get flagged, and you can have it very loose. And so it is kind of a Wild West in terms of how professors configure like what settings they allow and what they prevent. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say with like the notes, like most of mine are like, okay, you can have notes or whatnot. For the Proctorio, do the instructors, can they go in and say like, yeah, they're allowed to have notes, or do the Proctorio guys just not know that and then like immediately flag that? Because I'd like talk to them. I'm like showing them my notes. I'm like, hey, these are my notes. I'm singing my notes to them. I'm like talking to them. I'm like, I just don't know. I just like the same thing. I'm like, crap, I don't want to be flagged. So
Yeah, and I know there are certain predefined things. Can you do a custom? Like, yes, you can do the custom. Yeah. So the short answer, yes. I don't get a sense a lot of them do. I think and Karen, you would know a little bit, but my sense is they used pretty much the default set. I think a lot just kind of go with the default.
Most faculty do use the default, but if they are allowing notes or, sorry, if they are allowing for notes, or maybe, I know some exams, you need to be able to use like Excel, the Excel program, like if you're in accounting or something like that. There are settings within Proctorio that you would change to allow for that to happen. So for you to have your notes and things like that.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Okay, maybe this is more of just like a question about how Proctorio works. But like every time I've taken a Proctorio test, I've listened to music either in my earbuds or like just had a speaker going. I don't know if I get flagged for that, but I haven't ever gotten in trouble for it. I don't know.
Yeah, you did. We did have a professor I interacted with was just driving himself nuts because like 15 students in his class were flagged as cheating, and they were just listening to music. They were just rocking out.
Interesting.
That's it. So yeah, it does.
But it does pose a question, right? Because as a faculty, how would we know you're listening to music versus somebody speaking out answers to you, right? And so one of the recommendations in our document, whether you agree with it or not, is limiting access to technological resources, right? So to actually say students in this particular class, no earbuds, no smartwatches, no necklaces, right? I mean, basically like, you just, like, you can't have any of it because it's opening a door. But then again, I think going to the comfort thing, right, I'm assuming you do music because it's comfortable for you. And so if we start restricting that, to what degree are we actually making it the educational experience worse for you, right? It's a question.
Yeah, so recently I took a math test, and so throughout like my other assignments I did really good, but I didn't do so good on the math test. And I think the anxiety level of sitting there and then having to like show like being proctored and everything and just making sure that I'm not flagged or anything, I was so concerned about that. Like every time I would use my calculator, I'd always show the camera, even though the camera can't quite tell what I'm doing. I feel like that also wasted a lot of my time, and I think the anxiety level of that just made me not get such a good score because I was so concerned about not getting flagged.
I'm curious how many, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, but your comment about I would be okay with some trade-offs versus others. And I'm wondering how many of you feel that way or feel that it should just be like just scrap the whole thing and not use it, or if it's just I would be okay with certain measures like not a room scan, but yes, sharing my screen throughout. What's the audience's feelings? How many of you would be okay with some measure, some use of Proctorio, like some security features but not others? A raise of hands. How many of you just want the whole thing, burn it all down? Okay. I would be disappointed if your hand wasn't up. I was hoping for it.
I do actually have a question for the person in pink. And so that is time restrictions. And so as you're taking Proctorio exams, and I'm picking on you and other people might have answers, but since you had just spoken. So one thing I think with that anxiety thing and where you're like double like, yeah, cell phone, every motion takes time, right? Every time you do that type of thing, it takes time. If you're in a timed exam, and I'm not sure if you, so I guess one question is, was your exam timed and did this have an impact?
Yeah, my exam was timed, and I ended up like I was too focused on like showing my calculator and just like making sure I wasn't like seen as being cheating or anything that I ended up losing a lot of my time, so I wasn't able to like fully like go through all the problems and everything.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, thoughts, questions?
Okay, we're good.
And we
I
do
just
have,
have
we have
kind
3 minutes to go, so after that.
I just have kind of a random question. So, if a student creates a Quizlet of like a teacher's class, is that like a copyright issue if like the teacher's class is like original, work? Can that student like be held accountable for it?
I can.
You want to take it first?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the answer is yes. So it can be. And in the early days, we would actually issue letters to Quizlet and say you need to take down notice, analogous to what you do with like YouTube videos, right? You do your bootleg YouTube video of whatever, and then it gets taken down. Two things have happened on that front. One is that the sheer volume of stuff getting uploaded to Quizlet has outstripped our capacity to police it. Which, I mean, we just don't. And I've spoken with people in student affairs, and they've said we could have a full-time person whose sole job was to just patrol Quizlet and take down stuff. Like that's their entire job. The other thing we're starting to hear is that some of these sites that have been listed on this handout are starting to push back and say, take us to court then, and we'll hash it out in court. So they're not even responsive to the takedown notices.
There is a complication too, though, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're being paid, it gets more complicated, right? So if you're just a good faith student and we look at it and we're like, oh, they thought they were trying to be helpful, right? And said student helping student, that's kind of a different game than somebody who's going and making money, taking my content and posting it for profit, right? And so that's going to put you more squarely in that wasn't unintentional.
Yeah. I think we've got
Karen,
this,
and
and then
then-
yeah.
Oh, okay.
We have a question here.
Okay.
So my question's a little not completely developed, but thinking about how much money the university and in general is spent on proctored exams, and it's kind of revealing how worried we are about cheating. And like we talked a little bit, there's like the 3 groups: the people who won't cheat, people who might cheat but probably not, and those who will always cheat. Would it be more effective of spending more time and money on the ethics of teaching students the value of not teaching and getting them to change their mindset instead of trying to stop something that they might not do?
What a fantastic question.
I do want to note, though, embedded in that question is absolutely the question of cultural difference. And so it's a very nuanced, actually, conversation, but one we should be having over and over and over again.
And the thing I will just add to that is that might be a good conversation for your student government, because they're in a lot of high-level meetings and they can bring up points like that. And I would also, going to this, I hate to keep picking on this young woman in the front, but like, if you have preferred settings, if there are things that you feel like this is invasive, but I'm okay with this, that's the kind of thing you should talk to your professors about. It's the kind of thing you should talk about in your SRIs. So when you fill out that survey at the end of the semester, being able to say, hey, I would really appreciate it if you did these settings instead of these settings. I know you have to watch out for cheating, but this would be a better way, and would reduce anxiety on my part. So I would encourage you to get loud with that message, and talk to your government, talk to your department, talk to your faculty.
And UVUSA, the student government's body, is the most powerful body on this campus. They just often don't know it. We listen as administration, they listen to students over everyone. So use UVUSA to make a difference. That's it, we're done. Thank you.